Welcome to Voices of Adoptions, where we share the unique perspective, actionable advice, and meaningful stories of birth parents, adoptees, adopted families, and other members of the adoption community. I'm Donna Pope, your host, and I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to Voices of Adoption. I'm here with Brett Furst. How do you pronounce your name?
Brett Furst, and it's Doctor if you want to be fancy, Dr. Brett.
All right, let's be here. We're here with Dr. Brett Furst, and we're happy to have him. Dr. Furst is an adoptee as well as a clinical psychologist, or are you an actual psychiatrist?
Therapist, yeah. So I'm here in California. I'm an adoptee myself, and I also specialize in young adult and adult adoptees, specifically those that struggle with substance abuse or personality disorders.
Well, very interesting. So I want to hear your story, first of all, and then we're going to move into what you have learned in your clinical work. So, Brett, tell us a little bit about what you remember about your adoption and anything you'd like to share in that regard.
My adoption was an at-birth adoption, so my adoptive family was there when I was born. I was born in Oregon and transported to California the next day. So in terms of like the adoption itself, right, that's all that pre-verbal stuff that you always hear clinicians talk about. But I always knew that I was adopted. It was never a secret. It was never something that was hidden or, hush hush. But, realizing sort of the impact of it didn't come until much, much later. When I was an adult. And I started learning about this stuff and helping others and all that sort of thing. So, at the time as a kid, right, there wasn't really much of an impact, at least not one that I could see. But that's sort of the nature of adoption, is it comes out in sort of these secret, subversive kind of ways that seem like other things and are actually related to something else, right? And so trying to piece together what is from what has been a process for myself, and also both something that I help my clients with as well.
For sure. Now, you were raised with your half-sister, your half-biological sister. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have same biological mother, different father. She was adopted also at birth 3 years later-ish. My parents got a call from my bio mother asking if they wanted to adopt another baby. We grew up together. I also have two other half siblings that I haven't met or talked to much. I've met them before, but not in a long time. Who live with my bio mother up in Oregon. So yeah, my sister and I were raised together. She was my sister. She's my sister. And still is for our entire lives.
Mm-hmm. And so your other biological siblings that you haven't got the same relationship with, they're being raised by your biological mom?
Correct, yeah.
Older, younger?
They're younger, yeah.
They're younger.
So I'm first, my sister second, and then the two other ones.
And so as life went on, she felt like she could handle raising the next two children.
Yeah, presumably.
So how do you want to get to know them?
I don't not want to get to know them, but I also don't feel that drive either, right? There's a term that I use in a lot of different contexts. Aggressively neutral is a term that I use in particular with this. I also use it when I'm talking about how to work with certain populations. It means something different clinically, but I don't have anything negative towards them. But I also don't feel the need to create that relationship either. So I'm not against it, but I'm not seeking it out either.
So because your birth mom came to you with your sister, you would have gotten to know her a little bit.
I mean, I was 3 years old at the time, so was my parents mostly. We've seen her sporadically since then. Again, neutral, right, from my end. Like, there's nothing. I had mixed feelings about it more when I was younger. Now it's more, whatever. And not like in a nonchalant sort of way. It's just, again, like, yeah, there's gratitude there. There's no anger. There's no nothing. There's nothing negative there. But there is also, that's just not how it panned out, where there was a lot of relationship time and all that kind of stuff. And not for my parents not trying either, right? Like, she was around occasionally when I was a kid. But she was also a 15-year-old when I was born. She was 18 when my sister was born, right? So that didn't really make sense to me until I turned 15 and then subsequently 18.
And thought,
Like,
oh, I couldn't raise a kid right now.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
What that means to also be a child having a child, right? So the nature of that relationship, as it is with all adoptees, is unique, right? Like I very much push in my clinical work that there doesn't need to be a preference one way or another, right? And that's something that a lot of therapists misunderstand in working with adoptees is they come from like sort of the systemic, family, like let's get everybody together type of situation. And sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes it's not. It's okay for adoptees to want to know, biofamily. It's also okay for them not to want to know biofamily, right? Like it's a unique journey and story.
Right. Now, you are the director of specialty services.
Correct.
Explain a little bit what that means.
So I'm the director of specialty services over at Pace Recovery Center, which is a young men's treatment center for substance abuse and mental health. I'm also the clinical director at Rising Roads Recovery for Women, which is a women's facility that also treats substance abuse and mental health. So between those two programs, in the women's program, I run the whole program in addition to the adoption programming. At the men's program, I basically just run the adoption program and some of our academic school programming as well. But the specialty services at both places refers to our specialized adoption programming, which I've created at both facilities to treat the intersection of adoption and addiction.
Okay, and we're going to come back and spend quite a bit of time on that. But there is one thing I wanted to follow up about what you said. You said that when you were a child, you had mixed feelings about spending time with your biological mom. Explain that.
More that sometimes I felt like there was expectations of the relationship and I didn't know exactly what those were. And I think it was mostly coming from my adoptive family, not necessarily my bio family. But I felt like there was expectations of how I was supposed to engage or what I was supposed to feel or how I was supposed to feel it or when or what. Because as much as there can be books and things and whatever about adoption, which are all great, the actual experience is a highly subjective one, like I was saying before, right? It's completely unique. And so to go in with zero expectations is impossible, right? But to try and manage other people's expectations, which aren't really being voiced, but can be felt on top of your own expectations, on top of everything else, right? Like that creates that mixed feeling.
For sure. So if you were right now giving advice to adoptive families who have a relationship, because as you know, open adoption is, more the way to go. And so what advice would you give to adoptive families as to how to talk with their kids about the relationship that they might have with their birth parents?
I would say present it in as much as you can, terms that are related to you instead of trying to put that onto the kid. So what I mean by that is like, we feel this way about your bio family. Like mom and dad feel this way about, this relationship and all that kind of stuff. And trying to avoid, and usually it's never intentional, but it does come out that way of like, we want you to do this, we want you to do that, or we want you to follow how we feel about it, or like those sort of things, right? Because that's what gets mixed up. And as much as you can, follow the kid's lead on, what they want to do, and even if that means that they're doing, pushing away or not wanting to have that relationship, or they do want to have that relationship or whatever, right? That's the first thing. The other thing, which is almost more important, is for adoptive parents to work on their own attachment stuff too, right? That is the number one thing that I see working with young adults, and obviously they're adult parents, is the parents' attachment stuff has kind of got pushed to the wayside because the focus was on the kid, right? So as they grow older and everything kind of compounds and gets bigger, making sure that as adults, you're also taking care of yourself and your own mental health needs and your own attachment needs, because it's an attachment trauma for everybody in the system, right? And that doesn't mean that it's bad, but it does mean that you have to address it as is.
So address that just a little bit more. Okay, for example, I'm an adoptive mom.
Yeah.
So as an adoptive mom, I have my 3 boys and they have their attachment issues. And you're saying, Donna, you have your own attachment issues.
Right. Most likely, right? Like that's because it's
most likely. Please explain.
It's an attachment laden process, right? Like it's a process that is great and beautiful and all these awesome things, but also it has these impacts. And what's so often historically gotten ignored about adoption is people have viewed it as this one note. It's great. It's a beautiful thing for the parents who get to adopt because they get to have a kid, and it's great for the kids because they got adopted and they would have been, in a worse situation or whatever, right? So everyone's grateful, right? Which is true. But also, there's all this other stuff that can come from it too, and it doesn't make it bad. It just makes it complex. And so for adoptive parents, right, you didn't go through that process. That doesn't even necessarily make it better, but you didn't go through the process of carrying the child or, having all this prep time or, all these other things. It had a different origin than some other families, and that's going to create a different outcome that needs to be paid attention to, right? Usually there's some other kind of trauma for the parents too, not all the time, but sometimes, which leads into why they adopted in the first place, right? There's going to
infertility,
exactly
other things. Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be lots of that kind of stuff, and it's really, really important just to even go and have someone take a peek as to what's going on behind the curtain, right? And kind of get that input, because especially as the stakes get higher, as kids get older and the complexity increases, they increase in complexity. That's going to trigger all sorts of new things. So if you can start that base of like, okay, cool, we took care of this, we have an idea, we have a framework for working through these new problems, as opposed to new problems, and also we got to work through stuff at the same time. It's doable, absolutely, but it makes it more difficult. So doing it sooner rather than later helps.
I think adoptive parents don't even think about that. I remember working with one mom, and she had adopted a child that was 3 years old, which is a little bit different than adopting a newborn. And she came back to us a year or so later and said, he doesn't attach to me, and he doesn't even cry. And I want him to go somewhere else. And that was devastating, and it was devastating for him. And I remember driving away from her home with him and watching tears just roll down his face as he cried and cried. The attachment problem was not his.
Correct.
It was hers. And sometimes we don't think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because, there's a lot of reasons for it, right? In adults, we're not told that we have permission to have attachment issues too, right? We just find all these weird ways around them and all that kind of stuff. Like when I do my attachment education with the clients that I work with, also that kind of stuff, right? We'll watch videos of like, sad babies and, all this other stuff and attachment stuff. And I'm like, you're still that baby. You're just adult and complicated about it, but you're still the baby, right? And I tell that to adults too. I'm like, it's the same need. It never changes for attachment, right? We need it. Like we need food and water and air, but it also scares us, but that never changes. We just get adults and all complicated about it. We don't get to throw a tantrum when our mom leaves the room, or, we feel abandoned or whatever. We shove it down and hide it in all these different ways, but it's still so strong, in some ways even stronger.
Brett, I'm going to have us do something which probably will take us away a little bit. I want you to explain to people who may not know, what is attachment?
Attachment is the way that we connect to the people and sometimes things around us, right? So I say this a lot to my clients. I've already mentioned it here. Attachment is a basic biological need. Our brain tells us, and we do need it the same way that we need food and water and air, right? We don't physically grow as children without it, right? There's health benefits or health deficits, more specifically, if we don't get it. So attachment is the way that we connect to the people around us. Adoption is an attachment trauma, right? Regardless of circumstance. That does not mean that it's a bad thing, but it is something that needs to be addressed, right? There is an attachment break in adoption. There has to be, because they're leaving one parent or parents and moving to another one. There's going to be an attachment break. It can absolutely be rectified. Everything with attachment is learned. No one is born not wanting to attach, right? We're born with that need and that desire and that want. That can get messed up, though. That can get more fearful. That can get all these other things. And so we need to be able to take care of that and support it and bring it into a healthier space.
So there are multiple types of attachment, and you hear about the 4 different types of attachment. Run through each of those really quickly and talk about how adoption may fit into any one of those.
In general, any of the attachment styles, right? And you say 4, that depends on who you ask for, then what you use, right?
Exactly.
There's 25, there's 30, there's different subcategories, right? The 4 that I usually go through when I talk to my clients, just to keep it as simple as possible, is secure, anxious, avoidant, reactive, right? That might not even be the 4 that you're referencing, but like in general, the style doesn't matter as much as the why. So everybody has attachment wounds, right? An attachment wound can be anything from when you were in third grade, you told someone you thought they were cute and they said, go away, you're stinky, right? Like that's an attachment wound, right? Attachment trauma is a next level of that, right? But everybody has attachment wounds. We have them throughout our lives. It's how we react to them that inform our attachment style. So attachment styles get talked about a lot. Attachment styles are fluid, though. You might be super codependent, anxious with one person, and avoidant with everybody else. You might be avoidant with some people, anxious with other people. You might be reactive at one point in your life and secure at a different point in your life, right? They're not static because they're all trying to solve the same problem. And the attachment problem that is trying to be solved is I need attachment like I need food and water and air, but also the closer I get to somebody, the more potential they have to hurt me. And that is true, right? Hopefully they don't. That's the goal in building healthy, stable relationships, but it is always true. There is no such thing as a zero risk relationship. There is always a chance that something could happen to end the relationship or hurt or whatever, right? So we're doing this thing where we're trying to get close to people, but also the closer we get, the scarier it becomes. And so attachment styles are basically just fancy words for defense mechanisms of us trying to beat the problem, right? So adoptees, whether it's at birth, later, foster, whatever, they have that wound, they have that trauma, they have that break. And so it's going to teach them things about how attachment works. Maybe that they're impermanent or they can't be trusted or I need to cling on super tight or who knows, right? So my job is to help them unlearn some of those things and learn how to have a healthy, secure attachment. And the only one that I define is secure attachment. Secure attachment means I attach despite the risk. I understand there's risk and I accept it. And I decide to engage in it anyways.
Just real quickly, as a therapist, and clearly you are a good one. Clearly you are a good one. So in adoption, the adoptive family, the child, the birth mother, all of them are going to have attachment issues. And they may or may not choose to address those attachment issues. But if anybody's listening to this podcast, we want to encourage you to do that. How would they go about doing that?
Find a therapist or even find a support group, right? Even to start, right? But find a therapist, find somebody or some people who know what they're talking about when it comes to this, right? So even if it's an attachment therapist, an attachment specialist, right? An attachment therapist or attachment-based therapist, right? It doesn't have to even be adoption specific, especially like for the parents, right? Because that's going to be hard to find. But yeah, like find somebody to talk and have them kind of explain this stuff to you and, you know, run it down and help you understand better what all this means.
And so therapists will approach this issue by developing the relationship with their client directly. They'll try to create a situation in which the client will feel secure in their relationship with the therapist. Now, and then building upon that confidence that they develop with the therapist, it gives them a little more confidence to be more vulnerable with other people that they want to have relationships right. Am I saying that correctly?
Basically, yeah. So especially when we're working with like the young adults that I work with who are struggling with all the things they're struggling with, one of the things that I coach my staff on is that you are going to be some form of attachment figure for them, at least temporarily, right? And we use ourselves as a way to kind of launch them off of us and onto the real world. Obviously, we don't become like a full attachment figure for them because that would create problems. And it's not good. But yes, my staff is trained. Obviously, I do it to kind of figure out and seek out where the attachment I was coming from. But more importantly, as opposed to the where, because we could spend, years going through every incident that kind of led to the why you have this attachment belief or whatever. But how do we challenge it? What do we do about it now? How do we move you into that secure, safe attachment or more safe attachment so that we can challenge the original traumas or the wounds that brought you to this point?
Okay. Now, many therapists will say that with an adoption, it works best when the adoptee and the adoptive parents can come in and work with you. Would you agree?
In general, yeah, but it depends on where they are in their lives, right? Like, everybody is also an individual too. It's not just a system, right? There's individual pieces in that system. Like, young adults, 18, 20-year-olds come to me, with substance abuse issues. It's going to be a little while before I bring the family in. They'll be updated. We'll talk to them. We'll have communication with them. But to bring them in for like a full family session, it might take a while because I want to clear up some of the noise and get, all parties sort of stabilized enough to do that, right? Because if you do that part too soon, when everyone's kind of unstable, everyone just kind of becomes more unstable off of each other, right? So it depends on the level of appropriate. If they're little ones, sure, right? You need to kind of engage in that process. But also, I would want some time just one-on-one with the little one too, right? To kind of see where they're at, see what they say outside of what they might be perceiving as the attachment expectations of their system, right? So it needs to be both.
Let's launch into this issue of addiction and adoption. So many people will say that the answer to addiction is relationships, that the reason why people have addictions is an attempt to try to fulfill this lack that they're feeling because they don't have good relationships. Do you agree with that?
I agree with it in part. I don't think it's the totality of it, but I think it definitely is a part of it. And there's a couple aspects to it in terms of the attachment stuff. One is there's a lot of evidence that shows that addiction is a disease of attachment, right? But two, there's like two halves to it. One is the relationship attachment part, right, or lack thereof. The other part is the distraction element. So addiction is a disease of distraction. It's a disease of escapism. There's something about either my internal and or external reality. Mostly is internal, right? But there could be both. What is it about my reality that is uncomfortable, that I don't know how to deal with, that I can't get to the other side of, or at least I don't know how to get to the other side of, right? And instead of getting to the other side of it, I just avoid it, right? Which is what addiction is. I'm going to use something to help me avoid and not think about it, right? That can be, and often is, attachment stuff, right? Of the relationships or whatever. Something that we'll also see, especially in like high school age, is if there's difficulty with attachment, they end up becoming attached to what we call a using family, right? Which is just a group of people that use together and kind of co-sign each other's usage, right? Substance use. Because the only ticket for admission to being part of the proverbial kids smoking under the bleachers is to be a kid smoking under the bleacher, and then you're part of the group, right? So it's an easy admission, low risk type of attachment, but it doesn't really have any depth, right? But at least it's better than nothing is how they perceive it, right? And while that's not necessarily true, or at least the nothingness doesn't have to be true either, there's still that that's also a barrier to getting sober sometimes, because they know that if they get sober, they're going to lose the using family, because the using family is still going to be using and doesn't want to be around sober people. So sometimes they have a barrier to getting sober because they don't want to lose the only attachments they feel like they can have, which is where our job comes in, is to show them that they can have healthy, productive, good attachments that are better than the superficial ones.
And that first attachment sometimes is to you or to one of your therapists that work with you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
very
then
much.
from that, trying to slide them over or help them develop with more confidence other relationships elsewhere.
Correct, yeah.
So we may exclude this as a part of our visit, but these places where you might send somebody to deal with addiction away from the family, it doesn't seem like that would fit the paradigm that you're addressing.
Yeah, I get that a lot, right? And despite what it seems like, it actually does. Because especially for young adults and even adults, right? That separation allows them to recalibrate and figure out what they want and how they feel, separate from the expectations of the system, separate from the noise of friends and whatever else, right? So it's a clearing process, right? Of like, let's get rid of as much noise as possible from the outside so that we have a chance to help you get rid of some of the noise on the inside, right? So we can clear up and figure out what actually is going on. Because it's very hard to do, especially if you're in a household where like the parents haven't figured out their attachment stuff, you haven't figured out your attachment stuff, your siblings who are most likely adopted or not or whatever haven't figured out their attachment stuff. You don't have the supportive friend groups who can help guide you through this, right? You haven't found like a therapist who knows what they're doing with this sort of stuff. So you have all of that, and your ability to get better in an environment like that is, your odds are real low. So separating out from that, getting a complete reset from that, can help you get better so that you can reintegrate whenever is appropriate.
The challenge is you get reintegrated, but then you go back into that environment.
Well, yeah. And hopefully, honestly, a lot of them end up not going back into the environment. They still have a relationship with their family, but they move on and move somewhere else, as you would as a young adult, right? That's what we expect adult children to do, is to go live their own lives, right? at the same time, like that attachment stuff, right, it's an ongoing process for every human, not just adoptees, right? So we hopefully give them the tools to navigate, and they've gone through enough trials with us in our extended program to figure out how to move into the world and handle the problems on their own. Because that's the goal of therapy, is not to remove all problems, but to be able to give you the tools and the ability to recognize and deal with problems as they come up.
Now, this is really good, and it's very clear that you understand the clinical aspects of this. I'm going to now go back to you personally. How did you move into realizing this is what you wanted to do?
Originally, I didn't focus on adoption as like an element. I was just doing normal therapy stuff. Honestly, I fell into substance abuse therapy because my daughter was just born at the time I finished my master's at the time before I went into my doctorate. And I was looking for a therapy job, and substance abuse paid the most for a new therapist. And I was like, great. I never thought I wanted to work in it, but now I'm here. And I tell that story honestly, right? It's not because I had some calling to be super altruistic or whatever. I absolutely love the work that I do now. And I can't imagine doing anything else. This work fits me really, really well in a lot of ways. In terms of the adoption piece, that came a little bit later, but we saw, I was just working at PACE, the Young Men's Program at the time. We saw adoptees coming in, and they looked like they were having similar or the same problems as our other clients, but they weren't responding in the same way to our interventions and the work that we were doing.
Explain that just a little bit more.
They were taking longer to recover. They were more reactive in general, right? But there's just some more stuff. They weren't responding to staff or therapy the same way. But again, a lot of their stuff looked sort of the same, like behavioral issues and discomfort and, whatever else, right? So the issues were looking roughly the same, but they weren't responding. And so I started looking at, like, what is it that's different here, right? And the common theme was the adoption stuff. And so that led me to start kind of investigating and creating the programs that we now have that we've obviously been refining over the last 10 years or so. These programs, and we develop these ways in order to better help these clients, to where now, as far as I know, and I hope I'm proven wrong soon, we're the only program that specifically treats this intersection for this adoption, addiction, personality disorder kind of intersection, at this sort of level, at the inpatient, treatment level.
Okay, so let's go back and ask this question. So you could see that the adoptees were not responding in the same way non-adoptees were responding.
Correct.
And you begin to ask yourself, what's this additional element that we're seeing here with the adoption? Mm-hmm. And what did you conclude?
That in a lot of ways they're more complex, and that complexity is getting hidden by, the other stuff, right? Just because they have addiction issues doesn't mean the adoption stuff isn't also there too, and all those other things, right? So it ends up being multifaceted. Attachment is like the easy big answer, right? But it's so much more complex than that. And so the benefit of being in sort of like an inpatient and then eventually outpatient sort of setting is that we have full wraparound, right? It's an entirely contained and controlled environment where my staff, from just like the support staff, the techs that are there, during the day that are kind of transporting them around, all the way up to, my clinical directors or myself when I'm the clinical director, all that kind of stuff. All of my staff, every level of staff, have been trained directly by me on to understand adoption, to understand attachment, to how best to help these clients on a 24-hour basis, right? So it's a constant wraparound process that is difficult to replicate in the real world, right? And to kind of control the variables at that level and that sort of thing.
How did you learn how to do it?
Trial and error sounds bad, but there wasn't like a ton of error, but it was, this stuff doesn't exist, right? Like the research usually stops at kids that are around like 16, 18. There's very limited research on adoptees that are adults. I hope there's more soon, but there really isn't that much. And so mostly it was taking pieces of different things that kind of address attachment or stuff in this way and kind of extrapolating from our own experience and our own, in-depth workings with these clients in this situation, and kind of piecing it all together and creating the programs that we have now. And like I said, we just continually refine it. It's been almost 10 years now since I built this. So it's just been a continual process over that time of how to best refine and make this happen.
So I'm going to ask you what the major points of your process are, if you can describe that.
Sure. I'll do it in sort of the broadest terms, right? But a lot of it has to do with like, how do we manage? Because so we mentioned like, becoming an attachment figure for the client. They directly told us not to do that in school, right? So as a therapist, they say, hold your boundaries, don't do anything personal, don't
Yeah, and you
connect.
hear that all the time. But
Yeah,
how are they supposed to attach if you hold your boundaries so firm?
exactly. Right. So that was the first piece that we came across, is like, we are going to be attachment figures. Right. And so we need to be able to accept that and understand it and do it ethically. Right. Obviously, there's boundaries that need to be had. But how do we manage that as a program, understanding that? And sometimes being that attachment figure means they tell you F you to your face or whatever, right? Like you're the bad parent or whatever, the mean parent. And that's fine too, right? But as a program, we need to be prepared for managing. And that happens in addiction treatment in general, right? Where like everyone's attachments are a little bit screwy, but in particular adoptees, we need to know that coming in. That was the big overarching part that we had to kind of wrap our heads around. The other part was like, okay, how do we use that to our advantage, right? So for every adoptee that comes in, they have two therapists, one primary, one secondary. That secondary is chosen by the primary therapist to kind of best accentuate or accelerate this attachment stuff, right? How do we manage that, right? The third is understanding that they're going to take longer. They just do. For all the reasons, they just take longer. It's like a 2-step forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back process. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be all over the place. And so accepting that is as part of the process too. The third part is learning how to talk to the parents. That's a big one. That is not the bulk of my job, but it probably is the most specialized part of my job, in addition to treating the clients, is because the families, especially at the ages of my clients, 18, 20, 25, 30 even, they're still completely reliant on their parents, right? So parents can make or break my work. They can undo 90 days of work in a 5-minute phone call, right? So managing that and managing their attachments and helping them understand the process, and also understanding that it takes a lot of faith for them to send their kid, usually across the country, to have someone they never met take care of them, right? And trust their judgment on their son or daughter. So yeah, those are kind of like the 3 big like pillars of what we do. Obviously there's more nuance to it, but that's kind of the big swings.
What's your follow-up? How do you follow up once they leave you?
By the time they leave us, they usually have been with us for a while. We try and have like an elongated program to make sure everything we're building is tempered against it. But once they leave, right, usually we hear from families, if things go good or bad, they'll send us some messages and that sort of stuff. By the time they leave, we're pretty confident that like things are going to continue the way they've been going. I tell my clients that, I'm saying, hey, we're always here for you. Some of them continue in private practice with me. I've been seeing some clients for years. But a lot of times I'm like, hey, my goal is to get you to a place where when we're done, you ride off into the sunset and we don't hear from you anymore, right? We want you to go and live that life to the best that you can. There's obviously things that can mess it up, and this is addiction treatment. There's no guarantees ever. But we're always here. We're always open to helping.
And what do you think your success rate is?
That's always an interesting question. I pretty much probably believe that any treatment center that gives you a number is more than likely kind of fudging it or making it up. Mostly because of that question you just asked, right? How do we follow up? It's difficult to stay in continual contact and see where everybody is. So if you're saying like, yeah, everyone stayed sober a year after they left us, that means you had to keep track of everybody for a year, which is near impossible, right? So I will say I am proud of the work that I do and that we do, and we do the best that we know how, right, with these clients. And nobody else really, this isn't me like trying to be egotistical or toot my own horn, but really nobody else treats these clients in this kind of way, right? It doesn't exist anywhere else. And I hope that it does. I hope that it exists in more places than just here. But this population, adoptees are twice as likely to be addicts, 1.7 times more likely to be addicts than non-adoptees. And so they make up, I think it's like 7 to 15% of the treatment population, which is a huge chunk for one demographic to take up. So there's quite a lot of them. And so I don't know what our numbers are, but we do it better than anybody else because there isn't anybody else doing it.
A good friend of mine who we actually placed a child for adoption with, He runs a wilderness program for addicts. And when he was considering doing adoption, one of the things he said is, I just don't want to.
Was
He
it?
says, because most of the kids in my addiction program are adopted.
Yep.
And he was recognizing that there is something about adoption that leads to addiction.
Yep.
And he, at the time, I don't know that he had, talked about what you've talked about, and that it's an attachment issues. So now, for those adoptive families out there that are going, well, then I don't want to adopt. I don't want to deal with this.
Sure,
This
sure,
this
sure.
sounds
Yep.
too hard.
Yep.
Give us some advice.
So I love that question because I never want what I talk about to be a deterrent, right? And I've had adoptive parents that their kids are in treatment and they're like, what's going on? And, I give them the numbers and, the 1.7 times, they're like, why did nobody tell us? And there's a lot of reasons why they weren't told. But at the end of the day, they almost always thank me. They're like, we wish somebody would have told us this in the beginning. It wouldn't have changed our minds on whether we were going to adopt or not, but we would have known and been able to look for this sooner, right? So yes, your child having addiction is one of the scariest things that you can go through, right? Because you're seeing them actively degrade and not know how to take care of themselves, and you don't know what to do, and they could die and all of that stuff. And it's absolutely scary, but it is not the be-all, end-all of your parenting or their life, right? They can recover. It's a learned behavior. Everybody can recover, right? It's going to take some time and effort in stretching those parental muscles in a way that nobody is ever taught, because no one ever thinks this is going to happen. Nobody ever hopes. You ever look at a new baby and you're like, they're probably going to be an addict. Like, that's not anything that we think, because that's messed up, right? And why would you? But it does happen. It happens. It's unfortunately part of life everywhere, because life everywhere is uncomfortable. And so it's less about going with eyes wide open is what I can say, right? Learn as much as you can. I'm not trying to scare anybody away from adopting. Absolutely not. But
what you are saying, and you've said this already, is that every adoptive family has a potential of having their own attachment issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They may be insecurely attached. They may have gone through some of those things. And so there you would recommend going to a therapist and working on those issues.
Absolutely. Figure out your own stuff, right? Know where it lies. Anybody who's having a kid in whatever circumstance should do that. I really firmly believe that there should be some sort of requirement, right? Like, you have to go figure stuff out. And I'm being facetious, but I believe it, right? Like, go figure out where your stuff lies before you bring another life into the world, right? Whether it's through adoption, biologically, whatever. Like, go do that, because you're in charge of that life now, right? And you're in charge of shaping it. And if you don't know where your stuff is or how your stuff's going to impact the way that you shape it, it's going to get shaped in ways that you don't understand because you didn't understand your stuff in the first place.
And for those of us who have failed or who recognize that we didn't do it as well as we could, what do you recommend now?
It's fixable. You can always go back and fix it. It's learned behavior. Again, no one is born not wanting to attach. No one is born with messed up attachment stuff. Even people that have difficulty attaching, people that struggle with ASD or being on the spectrum, they still want to attach. It's just in their own way, right? So nobody is born not wanting to attach. You just need to learn how to do it securely in an appropriate way. And you can always learn that if you're open to it. It is always something that can be learned.
Now, every adoptive family and adoptee and birth mother that are sitting out there right now are asking themselves, where do I go? How do I get the help? What do I do?
Sure. So there's some really cool directories. Grow Beyond Words is one of them. I think it's just growbeyondwords.com, but they have a directory of adoption competent therapists in every state. There's also, and I think, in Grow Beyond Words, all of those therapists are also adoptees themselves. It's an adoptee therapist, adoption, whatever. You get the words. There's all the therapists are adoptees on that directory. There's also Unraveling Adoption. There's a directory there, and that includes therapists and other kinds of healers and all sorts of people that work in the adoption space, and a lot of them are also adoptees as well, or adoptive parents. So those are the two places that I usually direct people to find people for their states or their cities or wherever they're in, is Grow Beyond Words and Unraveling Adoption.
Okay. And now let's go back to you personally. So has your sister gone through some of the stuff that you've been going through, that you
Yeah,
went through?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And how did she approach it?
She's still in the midst of approaching it, and I don't want to speak for her, but it's always an ongoing, as it is for everybody. Attachment is an ongoing process, right? We form new attachments, right? My attachments in high school had different flavor than in college. And then in college, I met my now wife, which is now, 15 years later, it's a different flavor of attachment because now we have a daughter, right? So like, that's a different kind of attachment. Attachments are always growing and evolving, and it's always a new thing, right? So it's always, always, always an ongoing process for everybody, not just adoptees.
Now, if a birth mom is listening to this and she says, oh, I don't want to place my child for adoption because I don't want him to have the problems that were being described here, what would you say?
I get that a lot. And I get that scenario a lot. And I also get that scenario sort of in relation to what you were talking about earlier, which is like sending my kid away from the family to go to treatment, right? Is like, aren't we going to create another attachment wound? Maybe. But that can be overcome, and you're doing that so that it can be overcome in addition to all the other ones too, right? So sometimes you have to break it a little bit more in order to fix it, right? Or break it in a different way in order to fix it. So yes, as a birth mother, giving your kid up for adoption is going to be the most difficult thing that you do in your life, most likely, right? Giving up a child is insanely difficult. I can't even imagine. But also knowing that, yes, it might cause some of this stuff, or it might lead to some of this stuff, but also you not being able to take care of that child is going to lead to a whole bunch of other stuff too, right? I know stuff isn't a very clinical term, but it's trading one for the other, right? And it's hoping and having belief that, giving them to somebody else who can take care of them better than you can, right? Through maybe no fault of your own, most likely no fault of your own, it's just circumstance, right? But yes, giving them up it might lead to some of these things, but also keeping them might lead them to some of those things too. And one has maybe more resources or a better shot or like those sort of things at being able to fix them, where even when you're trying your best, you might not be able to give that to them.
Mm-hmm. You work with women a lot.
Correct.
Do you face some of these struggles for them?
Yeah, it's just different flavors of the same thing. All the attachment stuff, right? It's all there. Every human experiences it. It's just, again, different flavors, how trauma, how wounds, all that kind of stuff impacts it. But, there's obviously differences in the application and the way we run things and all that kind of stuff, but not in any major way. The core is still the same.
Mm-hmm. If I'm watching this and I'm asking myself, do I have an attachment problem? What might be some of the things that I might notice about myself?
Sure.
Or if I'm looking at my children and I go, do they have an attachment problem? What are some of the signs that might indicate that?
Great question. The first question I usually ask, especially my young adults, so all that kind of stuff, is like, all right, tell me about your romantic relationship history. Now, attachment isn't just romantic relationships. It's friendships, it's family, it's all that. But usually for the sake of figuring it out, because we've been inundated with so much stuff about romantic relationships, how they should be, how they shouldn't be, everyone talks about it forever, right? So it's the easiest place to start. And so look back on your history of romantic relationship. Look at your current one if you have one. Be like, is this where I want it to be? What do I feel like is different or missing? When looking at your kids, look at how they interact with their friends. Look at the ways that they handle hurt, right? Look at the ways that they handle rejection. Look at the ways that they handle these things, because that's going to give you a good indicator of where they're at. Because hurt, rejection, speed bumps, all of that are part of healthy relationships. Every relationship has speed bumps and hurts and dips and ups and all that kind of stuff. It's how we handle them that is indicative of our health or unhealth.
Explain that a little bit more. So what are some of the things that you might see in someone, how they handle these hurts and these bumps that's securely attached versus somebody who's not securely attached?
In a clinical sense, when I have a client, and here the schedule is a bit more fluid, things happen, we have to kind of move sessions. For someone who has difficulty with secure attachment, if I say, hey, something came up, I got to move your session from Monday to Tuesday, our usual session is like Monday at 1, I got to move you to Tuesday at 1. what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, that's where, like, that little change of the fact that there's not going to be that consistency every week of seeing me, right? And it's going to be moved one day later, or even later in the afternoon or earlier in the morning. That's going to throw them off, right? So take that in a little kid example, you know, when they're playing a game and something doesn't go their way and they kind of lose it, or they get real sad, or, you know, that sort of stuff, and they equate their attachment with things that are external. Okay, that's something to kind of look at, right? In adults, we're, like I said, more complicated and weird about it, but look at your relationship history. Look at how you handle when, you know, you could be sad if you're supposed to go on a third, fourth date with somebody. They're like, hey, sorry, like, my mom's sick, I gotta go. And then if you get more upset than you think you should, or you get angry, right? Being upset is normal. But if it's exaggerated, or you kind of lose it, or you cut that person off then, or, you know, those sort of things, okay, maybe start looking into that, right? So all of those little ways that we attach the world around us.
Yeah. No, that's very good. And now I notice that about myself, or I notice that about my child. Now's when I need to go and get a therapist and have that additional help.
Correct.
Can't I just do it myself? Couldn't I, as an adoptive mom, just be a much, much better, more attentive, more attached person to my child?
Theoretically, sure, but not if you don't know where your stuff is, right? And so it's very difficult to find where our stuff is without someone helping us get there, right? It's not impossible. It's definitely doable, but it requires an aggressively rigorous honesty with yourself, because you need to really kind of get in there and get to the things that are uncomfortable, because the reason you develop things the way that you have is because it felt protective. It felt good. It felt safer than doing things the more connected way, right? So to undo that is going to be scary, and it really helps to have someone walk you through that. Is it the only way? No. Is it one of the best ways? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. But you've got to find a good therapist.
That is true. Yes. And I say this as a PSA to everybody all the time. Like, don't go to one therapist, and if you don't like it, think that therapy doesn't work for you, or that is, you know, that you're broken or whatever, right? Like, try more therapists. We're humans too. We get along with some people, we don't get along with others. That's fine. No good therapist is going to be insulted that you said, I'm going to go try somebody else. I didn't feel like we were clicking. And if they do get insulted, good, you're moving away anyways, and that's a problem. So, like, you know, there's try more therapists, try more groups, try more things.
Brett, this has been a lovely visit.
Sure.
Kind of in conclusion, are there things, now I want you to address all members of the adoption triad. Well, I'm going to call it this constellation: adoptive families, adoptees, birth parents. What advice would you give each of them?
Be open to the process and have grace with yourselves and others in the system, right? Because this is not a thing that anybody talks about. This is not anything. Yeah, there's books on it, but, like, it's not, you're not taught this when you're a parent. You're not taught this when you're a child, right? This is stuff that, like, don't feel bad for not knowing this, and don't feel bad for having problems. It's what you do with the problems that matters, not whether you have them or not, right? So the things exist as they are. Adoption is a trauma. We can't change that, right? It's what you do about it that matters, not whether it is or isn't.
There are many people right now in the adoption community that will say adoption is a trauma, therefore let's not do it.
No, it's adoption is a trauma. What do we do about it? Because there's things in this world, there's people that experience trauma for no reason other than it just happened, right? Things just happen, right? Adoption is a trauma. Yeah, you can choose to put your child up for adoption or not, but just because it's a trauma doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means be aware that it is, and you can fix it. It is reversible. They can have a completely normal, secure, happy life.
Do you feel like you've got that kind of with your parents?
Yeah, I mean, everything is as healthy as it needs to be, basically, right? Like, mostly I look at how I interact with my daughter and my wife, right? Like, the family of choice, right? And that's one thing that I always bring up whenever I do adoption talks or I present at conferences or whatever, is we're all taught the saying, blood is thicker than water, right? That's not the actual original saying. The original saying is the blood of the chosen is thicker than the water of the womb, which means the people that we choose to be our family, either it's adoption, or we choose later in life, they are usually closer to us than sometimes our actual family. You can also choose your actual family, actual whatever family, to be your chosen family as well. But to bring choice into the matter strengthens the relationship, right? So my wife, my daughter, my friends who I call brother, sister, my daughter calls them aunt and uncle. That's the chosen family, right? And my ability to create that is how I judge my attachment health. Who do I pick? How do I pick? Do I pick good people? Can I maintain relationships? Can I go through the ups and downs? That's what matters.
Oh, Brett, this has been wonderful. You've actually addressed many of the issues that we find in the adoption community right now, because there's a lot of concerns around this whole idea of trauma. In part, it's great because we're recognizing that, like you said, that single note, it isn't a single note. It isn't, oh, it's lovely. It isn't a single note.
Yeah.
It's multifaceted. All aspects of adoption are.
Yeah.
And so addressing that and recognizing that allows us to be able to look for ways to solve some of these problems.
Absolutely. Addressing it as it is, not what we want it to be.
Right. So books that you would recommend people read?
I always get that question. I really should read more of them. But I've kind of not stuck myself in this space, but I'm in this space where what I do, there isn't much around it, right? Like we're kind of creating this as we go. Obviously, like the primal wound is the one that everybody talks about, right? Like that's kind of like the attachment basics, all that kind of stuff. But just
there's a subsequent book to the primal wound too. There's another book. I'll have to send it to you, but there's another one where they address the issue of the primal wound and how to go about healing it.
Love it. Yeah. Because some people get stuck on like, oh, I have this primal wound and this is forever. And it's like, it's not forever. You can address it. You can deal with it. You can fix it. So yeah, just, look at anything that you can find. There's tons of great adoption podcasts and that sort of stuff out now. There's great talks. There's people like me out there kind of talking about what it means to be an adult adoptee. There's groups. There's all those things. So, go out and find those things and find the things that resonate with you. And if they don't resonate with you, reach out to people who can help you with that sort of stuff, right? Who might know, might be able to communicate more. I'm always available to anybody that wants to email me or, check in with me, go to my website, whatever. I'm always happy to chat with anybody. So, about this work and help them find people if there are people. Unfortunately, sometimes I get that question and I'm like, I don't know if there's anybody, where you are. But the Grow Beyond Words, the Unraveling Adoption, those are both great places to look for people.
Okay. So we're going to include all of those things in our show notes. We're going to also have you, we'll have you put your links and how people can contact with you. And we might come back to you again. This has been a wonderful visit.
Happy to. Yeah,
because
no problem at all.
Addressing some of these issues that are all around the adoption community, but nobody's really taking them on to say, there's some solutions to this. It's not just give up your hands and say, let's not do adoption anymore.
There are solutions to all of this. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Brett. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. No problem.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Adoption. I'm Donna Pope. Every voice in the adoption triad deserves to be heard and understood. Visit voicesofadoption.org to subscribe and access our additional resources. And join us next time as we continue to build bridges through conversation.